A storm was tearing through the Rockies that night, the kind of storm that could erase an entire town. Snow fell like shards of glass, and the wind screamed through the canyons of Aspen Hollow. Out there, beneath the dying light of a gas station sign, a small boy stumbled barefoot through the drifts, clutching a broken toy truck, his tears freezing before they hit the ground. Miles away, in a cabin deep within the forest, Ethan Cole, a war veteran haunted by his past, sat by a dim fire beside his old German shepherd, Ranger. Then, through the roar of the wind, he heard it. A cry, faint but human, carried by the storm. He froze. Ranger's ears twitched. That single sound would change both their lives forever. What follows is a story of courage, redemption, and the quiet miracle that happens when one man refuses to turn away from the cold. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe kindness still matters, hit subscribe and stay with us for this unforgettable story. The storm came down from the high peaks like a living thing, swallowing the valley and every quiet little life within it. Aspen Hollow, Colorado, 2 narrow streets lined with clapboard shops, a tired diner with a flickering neon sign, and a small church buried in snow, hid under the weight of January. The wind tore through the alleys and rattled the old windows, carrying the sharp scent of pine and iron-cold air. Headlights moved like pale fish through what used to be the highway, and the mountains pressed close as the sky fell in sheets of white. Up the ridge, away from town, a small wooden cabin stood among the pines, its windows glowing the soft amber of firelight. Inside, Jack Grayson kept the fire steady. 42, tall and broad-shouldered, a man built from years of quiet work, hauling wood, patching roofs, surviving winters alone. He had the calm of a soldier who'd seen too much, and the weariness of someone who'd learned silence could be both comfort and curse. His dark hair had begun to gray at the temples, and a fine white scar traced the edge of his cheek, a relic from a night overseas that still haunted him. The lines around his eyes weren't from age, but from remembering. He'd lost his wife long ago, and the fever that took his little boy the following winter had left him hollow in ways the mountain couldn't fix. He lived now with only one companion, Ranger, an old German shepherd with a scar down his hind leg and eyes the color of warm whiskey. The dog slept near the fire, breathing slow, his body curled just close enough to feel Jack's presence. Outside, the wind shifted, pressing against the cabin walls. Ranger's ears twitched. He didn't bark. He wasn't the kind that barked for nothing, but he lifted his head, eyes fixed on the door. Jack paused, mug halfway to his lips, feeling the same prickle of instinct. The fire hissed softly. The storm groaned beyond the walls. And then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the mountain. A cry, faint, almost a trick of the wind. He froze. "Ranger," he said quietly. The dog stood, tail stiff, gaze sharp as if reading his thoughts. Jack set the mug down, grabbed his coat and flashlight, and reached for the old rifle by the door. The moment he opened it, the blizzard roared in, snow lashing his face, the air sharp enough to cut. He pulled his knit cap low, scarf over his mouth, and stepped into the storm. "Easy," he muttered, as Ranger bounded down the steps ahead of him. The flashlight beam pierced the white wall only a few feet before vanishing. The world beyond was nothing but noise and movement. Then it came again. The sound. A child's cry, faint but real, carried on the wind. Jack's pulse quickened. He leaned into the storm, following Ranger's tracks through the drifts. Each step was a fight. Snow climbed to his knees, biting through his jeans, but he kept moving, guided by that fragile thread of sound. The dog stopped suddenly and barked, once, short and urgent. Jack raised the beam, and there, at the base of a pine, something red flickered against the snow. He stumbled forward, heart hammering. A small shape lay half buried in white, curled tightly around a stuffed bear. "Hang on, kid," Jack whispered, dropping to his knees. He brushed snow from the boy's face. Maybe 8 years old, lips pale blue, skin ghostly cold. The small chest barely moved. Jack pressed his fingers to the child's neck. There, faint and slow, a pulse. "You're okay," he murmured, voice cracking. "I've got you now." Ranger stood close, his body forming a wall against the wind. Jack stripped off his coat, wrapped it around the boy, and lifted him carefully, tucking the bear under his chin. "Stay with me, kiddo." The boy stirred, a whisper of breath escaping between chapped lips, something that might have been Mom. Jack swallowed hard, the word cutting deeper than the cold. He pulled the child closer, rising to his feet. "We'll get you warm. Just hang on." The climb back was agony. The snow swallowed each step, and the wind shoved at him from every side. Ranger forged ahead, pausing to look back as if willing Jack forward. The cabin's faint yellow glow appeared through the storm, like a promise. Jack reached the porch, shouldered the door open, and staggered inside. The warmth hit him like mercy. He laid the boy near the fire and moved quickly. Kindling, matches, breath. The flames caught, throwing light against the walls. Ranger lay beside the child, pressing his body close for heat. Jack stripped off the boy's soaked clothes, wrapped him in a flannel shirt and quilt, and rubbed his small hands between his own. "Come on, buddy. Breathe." Minutes crawled by, the only sounds the fire's crackle and Jack's whispered prayers. Then, a gasp. The boy's chest lifted, then again. Jack exhaled, shoulders trembling. That's it, kid. You stay with me." He reached for his canteen, wet the boy's lips, then brushed a thumb across his cheek. "You're gonna be all right?" Ranger shifted, resting his muzzle across the boy's feet. Jack smiled faintly. "Good boy," he said, voice low. "Keep him warm." The storm howled outside, shaking the windows, but inside the cabin a fragile peace settled. Jack sat near the hearth, the firelight painting his scarred face gold. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of breathing, warmth, and something like hope. The boy stirred again, eyes fluttering open. Hazel, deep and searching. "Mom?" he whispered. Jack leaned closer. "Not yet," he said softly. "You're safe now. We'll find her." The boy's eyes closed again, his small body relaxing into the quilt. Ranger's breathing synced with his, slow and steady. Jack leaned back, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hands. The fire threw dancing shadows across the room, and for a long moment he just watched them move. He thought of his own son, the fever, the nights that ended too quietly, and the ache that had lived inside him for years. He'd built his life around silence, around things he couldn't fix. But now, here in the middle of the storm, life had handed him something he could hold. He looked at the boy, then at the dog, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore, kid. None of us are." Ranger's tail swept the floor once, slow and steady. Jack pulled the quilt higher around the boy and fed another log to the fire. Outside, the wind still screamed across the ridge, but it couldn't touch them here. The cabin breathed. The boy's cheeks had turned faintly pink. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket, and Ranger's head rested like a silent guardian on the child's hip. Jack sat there for a long time, listening to the storm rage and fade, until the only sound left was the fire's whisper. The world beyond the window was all white and cold and merciless, but inside there was warmth, small, defiant, and alive. Jack watched the boy's chest rise and fall, then let his head rest back against the stone. The dog's breathing filled the quiet, steady as an old clock. Jack closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to bear witness to the simple miracle of another heartbeat in his home. Morning would come, and when it did, he'd be ready. The storm had broken, but it left behind a silence so thick it felt alive. Morning crept over Aspen Hollow like an exhausted traveler, pale and slow, bleeding light through the cracks of the mountains. Everything was white, the pines, the fences, even the sky. The small town in the valley below looked frozen mid-breath, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Up the ridge, Jack Grayson pushed open the cabin door, a gust of cold air swirling in behind him. The fire inside had dimmed to a few glowing embers, filling the room with a faint orange pulse. Jack rubbed his hands together, the skin rough and red from hours of tending to the boy through the night. On the couch near the hearth lay the child. Ben, he now knew from the stitched name on the stuffed bear clutched tightly in his arms. The boy was still asleep, chest rising and falling with small, fragile breaths. Ranger, the old German shepherd, lay against him, eyes half open as if guarding a secret too precious to speak aloud. The warmth in the room was fragile, like the inside of a candle flame. Jack crouched near the fire and fed it another log. He hadn't slept, but fatigue sat quietly behind his ribs, patient. He looked at the boy again. The color had crept back into Ben's cheeks, though faint traces of blue still lingered around his lips. "You made it through the night, kid," Jack murmured, voice hoarse. He reached for the canteen, filled a tin cup, and lifted the boy's head gently. Ben stirred, blinking at him. "Where's my mom?" The voice was barely a whisper. Jack hesitated, choosing the truth that wouldn't break him. "She might be close," he said softly. "I'm going to find her." The boy's fingers tightened around the bear, but his eyes drifted shut again. Jack stood, grabbed his parka and radio. The old device crackled when he turned the dial. Static hissed, then silence. He tapped it once, muttered, "Nothing." He turned to Ranger. "You stay. Guard him." The dog gave a low whine, tail sweeping once across the rug, then settled beside the boy. Jack stepped outside into a world remade by the storm. The air bit his face, so sharp it almost felt clean. The sky was white over white, the mountains cut from glass. Each breath formed a plume that vanished into the cold. He started down the slope toward the place where he had found Ben the night before, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The forest around him was quiet, except for the occasional whisper of falling frost. He found the clearing easily, the blue glove still half buried near the roots of a tree. Kneeling, Jack brushed away the snow. The prints from last night had softened, but one thing stood out. A faint, narrow trail leading away from the site, a drag mark stretching downhill. He followed it, boots crunching, eyes scanning the ground for anything human. The trail cut through the timber, weaving toward the ravine. The deeper he went, the steeper the descent became, the trees crowding, close like onlookers. Then, halfway down, he saw it, a flash of metal, blue beneath the frost. The wrecked snowmobile lay twisted at the bottom of a slope, one runner bent, the body half buried under a crust of ice. Jack's stomach tightened. He slid the last few yards, boots digging in for balance, and crouched beside it. The seat was torn, smeared dark with frozen blood. A few feet away, a bag lay open, half filled with snow. Inside was a wallet, a driver's license, and a photo. a woman with soft brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail, eyes bright, smile easy, her arm around a boy, Ben. On the back of the photo, in faded blue ink, someone had written, "Emily and Ben, summer at Hollow Ridge." Jack's breath caught in his throat. So this was her, the mother still out there somewhere. He looked around. No body. No footprints except the drag marks that disappeared beneath a tangle of fallen branches. Someone had been hurt, maybe crawled away. He called out, voice echoing through the pines. "Emily Parker, this is Jack Grayson, can you hear me?" Nothing answered but the wind. He tried the radio again. Static. He cursed softly and shoved it back in his coat. He scanned the tree line once more, memorizing every broken branch, every indentation. The snow told stories if you knew how to read them, and this one was clear. She was alive long enough to move, to fight her way from the wreck. But how far could an injured woman go in that storm? Jack's gaze lifted toward the east ridge. If she had any sense, she'd follow the slope down to the creek. It might lead toward town. He thought of the boy sleeping back in the cabin. He couldn't risk leaving him alone for long. Jack knelt again and pulled a strip of birch bark from his pocket. With the edge of his knife, he carved a short message. Crash site found. Woman missing. Child alive. Heading back to cabin. He wedged the bark under the snowmobile's handle and anchored it with a stone before turning back. The climb up the ridge burned his legs, each step a test of will. He paused once to catch his breath and looked out over the valley. From here, Aspen Hollow looked like a watercolor painting left in the snow too long. Blurred edges, soft colors, faint traces of life. He wondered how many people below knew what had happened in these woods last night. Probably none. Some tragedies happen so quietly, the world doesn't even blink. He adjusted the strap of his rifle and pushed on. By the time Jack reached the cabin again, the light had dimmed, thin and silver. Ranger met him at the door, tail wagging once in relief. The warmth hit him like a wave. He knelt beside the couch. Ben was awake, eyes glassy but alert. "You came back," the boy said. "Did you find her?" Jack shook his head. "Not yet. I found her snowmobile. Looks like she got hurt but walked away. I'll go again tomorrow." The boy nodded slowly, trying to be brave, the way kids do when they understand more than they should. "She said she'd come for me," he whispered. "She will," Jack said, and meant it. He tucked the quilt tighter around the boy and poured a small cup of warm water. Ranger circled once and lay beside them, the steady rhythm of his breathing filling the space between words. Jack sat back, stretching his hands toward the fire. His muscles ached, but his thoughts wouldn't settle. The photo haunted him. The easy smile of a woman who had no idea the world would turn like this. He remembered the way Ben's small body had felt in his arms the night before, light but heavy with responsibility. Something in him had shifted. He'd gone into the woods as a man reacting to a cry for help. Now he was part of something larger, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Ranger's ears twitched. The wind outside had picked up again, dragging the scent of pine smoke and distant cold through the cracks. Jack reached for his old thermos, took a swallow of coffee gone bitter and cold. "We'll try the ranger station at dawn," he said to the dog. "If she's still out there, we'll find her." Ranger blinked slowly, a quiet agreement in the flicker of firelight. Jack leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting toward the boy. Ben had fallen asleep again, the stuffed bear still trapped beneath his chin. The letters of his name, Ben, caught the light in dull green thread. Jack stared at it until the edges of the room softened and blurred. The wind outside moaned through the trees, but in here there was peace. a fragile, flickering piece. He whispered into the quiet, "Hang on, Emily. Just hang on." And somewhere deep in the woods, beneath the unbroken white, the mountain held its breath, keeping her secret for one more night. The wind had died sometime before dawn, but the cold still pressed against the earth like a hand refusing to let go. The trees stood silent, their limbs heavy with ice, the world painted in shades of white and gray. Jack Grayson stepped outside the cabin, boots crunching through the crust of frozen snow, breath ghosting in the still air. The boy, Ben, was sleeping fitfully inside by the fire. Fever had come during the night, his skin too hot, his breathing shallow. Jack had placed a damp cloth on his forehead, whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He didn't have time to wait anymore. Somewhere out there, a woman was bleeding, freezing, maybe dying, and the only way to save one might be to find the other. "Let's go, Ranger," he said quietly. The German shepherd was already at his side, eyes alert, tail low but steady. They moved together through the snow, two dark figures against the endless pale. Jack carried his rifle slung across his back, his pack half filled with gauze, rope, a thermal blanket, and a single flare. The rest of his supplies were running low. He didn't care. The mountain had taken enough from him over the years. He wasn't letting it take a child's mother, too. They retraced the same path from the day before, heading toward the ravine where the snowmobile wreck lay. The air was crisp and brittle, the kind that burned the lungs if you breathed too deeply. Ranger's paws left perfect prints behind them, steady and disciplined, like a soldier who had learned the rhythm of war. Jack could almost hear his old sergeant's voice in his head. "Stay sharp, stay low, trust your gut." It had kept him alive through ambushes and blackouts in Afghanistan. Now it was the only thing guiding him through the white silence of Colorado. By the time they reached the ravine, the sun had climbed high enough to burn the edges of the snow, turning everything into a world of blinding light. Jack crouched by the wreck again. The snowmobile hadn't shifted, though new drifts had started to swallow its shape. He brushed off the carved bark note he'd left yesterday. Still there, but something else caught his eye. Near the left runner, half hidden under ice, was a smear of fresh red. He scraped it gently with his glove. It wasn't frozen solid. New blood. Jack's pulse quickened. "She's still moving," he muttered. Ranger lifted his nose, sniffed the air, and gave a short, sharp bark. Then he began to move. Slow, deliberate, following an invisible line through the trees. Jack followed, stepping where the dog stepped. The trail climbed along the slope, the snow thinning where wind had scraped it bare. A few torn threads clung to the bark of a pine tree, a red flannel fiber, same as before. She had passed here. The forest grew denser, shadows long and strange. Minutes stretched into an hour. They crossed a small frozen creek, its surface cracked like glass. Ranger stopped suddenly, tail stiff, head turning toward a fouet cluster of rocks near the bend. Jack raised his rifle instinctively. "What is it, boy?" The dog barked again, shorter this time, and trotted toward the rocks. Jack followed, heart pounding. Behind the largest boulder, half buried in snow, lay a glove, a woman's glove, brown leather with fur lining, soaked through and stiff with frost. Beside it, faint footprints pressed into the ice, the stride uneven. She had been limping. Jack looked up the slope. The footprints led toward a thicket of spruce, disappearing into the trees. "She's headed north," he said to himself, "toward the ridge." That meant danger, exposure, cliffs, no shelter for miles. He tried the radio again, pulling it from his coat. "Aspen Hollow Dispatch, this is Grayson. Anyone copy?" Static answered, followed by a faint, broken hum. He turned the dial, raised his voice. "This is Jack Grayson. I've got one child rescued, another missing adult, possible hypothermia, requesting rescue team coordinates." Silence. Then the faintest whisper of a voice. "Copy. Signal weak. Repeat coordinates," before dissolving back into static. He slammed it shut in frustration. He exhaled slowly, watching the mist leave his lips. "All right," he said to Ranger. "We'll mark the trail. Get back to the kid before sundown." Ranger gave a low growl. Not protest, but concern. His ears twitched, nose testing the wind. Then, without warning, he barked sharply toward the ridge. The sound echoed through the canyon like a flare. Jack froze. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard something in return. A faint cry, human but distant. It came again, carried by the wind. "Emily!" he shouted, stepping forward. "Emily Parker, can you hear me?" The echo answered, weaker but real. A woman's voice, far away and fading. Ranger lunged ahead, tail raised, barking with renewed force. "Easy, boy," Jack called, following through knee-deep drifts. They pushed toward the sound, climbing over fallen branches and ice. For several minutes, the voice guided them like a ghost through the trees. But then, it stopped. Silence. Ranger slowed, circling, nose pressed to the ground. Jack scanned the ridge. There, between two pines, something dark against the snow. Cloth. He ran. His heart thudded in his chest. It was a jacket, red flannel torn along the sleeve. He lifted it. Warm. Someone had been here within the hour. "She's close," he breathed. Ranger sniffed the fabric, growled softly, and turned east again. But before they could move, the wind picked up, hard, sudden, a new squall sweeping down the mountain. Snow whipped sideways, erasing everything. Within minutes, the tracks vanished. Jack shielded his face with his arm, shouting above the roar, "Ranger, back to the wreck, now!" They fought their way through the whiteout, the storm closing like a curtain behind them. By the time they reached the ravine again, visibility had dropped to near zero. Jack's coat was coated in frost, his beard rimed with ice. He knelt near the snowmobile, carving a larger SOS into the snow with the butt of his rifle. 3 wide strokes, unmistakable from the air. He planted the flare beside it, but didn't light it yet. The mountain was breathing again, angry. Ranger pressed against his leg, shivering but alert. "We'll come back," Jack said, panting. "She's alive. She's gotta be." The dog tilted his head, ears flicking, as if agreeing or praying. Jack pulled the radio once more, hoping the elevation might give him a sliver of range. "Aspen Hollow, come in," he rasped. Static, then a faint burst of sound. "Unit, red, found, repeat." "Damn it," he hissed. He turned toward the trail, mind made up. The boy came first. If he lost Ben now, none of this would matter. The trek back was slower, the storm clawing at his coat and filling his footprints as soon as he made them. Twice he stumbled, once dropping to one knee to catch his breath. Ranger kept to his side, body pressed close, guiding him like he once had during their service years. When they finally reached the cabin, the sun was gone, replaced by a dim gray glow that filtered through the snow like moonlight underwater. Inside, the air was thick with heat and worry. Ben was awake, cheeks flushed bright with fever. His lips trembled when he saw Jack. "You came back." Jack knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Hot, too hot." "Easy, kid. You're gonna be okay." He mixed snowmelt with the last packet of electrolyte salts from his pack and helped Ben drink. Ranger lay beside them, chest rising slow, his fur steaming from the thaw. Jack took a deep breath, rubbed his eyes. "I found her trail," he said quietly, more to himself than to the boy. "She's still fighting." Ben's eyes blinked weakly. "You'll find her, right?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. We'll find her." He added another log to the fire, the flames licking higher, throwing their faces into gold and shadow. Ranger's ears twitched once at the wind outside. Then he let out a low, hopeful bark that echoed faintly through the walls, like a promise carried into the storm. The night had turned savage, a white beast roaring through the mountain passes. Wind screamed through the pines, flinging sheets of snow across the narrow road where Jack Grayson's old Ford pickup fought to stay upright. The headlights carved weak tunnels through the storm, swallowed almost instantly by darkness. The wipers screeched in protest, smearing ice across the windshield as the world dissolved into white. Inside the cab, the heater groaned but couldn't chase away the cold. Jack's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his breath fogging the glass. On the seat beside him, Ben lay bundled in thick blankets. Ranger pressed close against him, the German shepherd's warm breath rising in slow, worried puffs. The boy's small face was pale, his lips cracked and blue, chest rising only every few seconds. Jack stole a glance at him, fear slicing through the numb exhaustion. "Hang in there, kid," he muttered. "You're not quitting on me now." Ranger whined softly and nosed closer to Ben's cheek, his amber eyes flicking between the boy and Jack, as if pleading with him to drive faster. Jack's jaw tightened. The truck jolted as it hit a patch of ice, tires spinning before catching again. The storm outside screamed louder, a wall of snow and fury. He could barely see the road now, only the faint shimmer of guardrails flashing by, the sheer drop beyond lost in blackness. "Come on, girl," he said to the truck, slapping the dashboard. "You've done worse. Don't die on me now." The old engine coughed, sputtered, then growled back to life. But even as the wheels churned forward, Jack's heart dropped. The boy's shallow breathing had stopped. He slammed the brakes, tires locking, the pickup sliding sideways before crunching to a halt against a mound of snow. "No," he whispered, voice breaking. "No, no, no!" He threw himself across the seat, pulling back the blankets. Ben's face was still and white as marble, lips blue, eyes half-lidded. God, not now. Jack's hands moved on instinct, pressing 2 fingers to the boy's throat. Nothing. He laid him flat across the seat, braced himself, and began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, he muttered, counting under his breath, voice trembling. He leaned down and breathed into the boy's mouth. "Come on, Ben. Breathe. You hear me? Breathe!" The storm pounded on the truck, shaking it like a cage. Ranger barked once, pacing anxiously in the cramped space, his breath steaming in the cold air. Jack's shoulders ached, arms burning, but he didn't stop. He pressed again and again and again until the sound came, a faint gasp, like a thread pulled from silence. Ben's chest rose once, then again. Jack froze, his own breath catching. "That's it," he whispered. "That's my boy. That's it." He pulled him close, wrapping the blankets tight, and motioned for Ranger. "Keep him warm, buddy. Don't let him slip." The dog pressed close, curling around the boy, his thick fur forming a cocoon of heat. Jack wiped his face with the back of his glove, started the engine, and shoved the gear stick forward. The truck roared, wheels spinning before biting into the snow. They lurched back onto the road, swallowed again by the storm. The miles blurred into madness. Snow slashed across the windshield, erasing everything beyond the hood. Jack drove by memory, by instinct, trusting the faint glow of the electric poles that marked the road. Each one felt like a lifeline. The wind screamed, the tires skidded, the truck rattled like it would shake apart. But he didn't slow down. "Come on," he said to the storm, to fate, to God. "You took enough from me already." His arms trembled from the cold, his breath shallow, but he kept going. The world had become a tunnel of white noise and desperation. Then, through the blizzard, he saw it. A dim red glow in the distance, a cross shining faintly through the snow. The mountain clinic. Hope. Jack laughed, half mad, half relieved. "We made it," he said aloud, voice shaking. "You hear that, Ben? We made it." Ranger barked once, sharp and clear, the sound of victory against the wind. The truck hit the parking lot like a battering ram, tires crunching through layers of ice. Jack didn't bother shutting off the engine. He flung the door open, grabbed Ben into his arms, and stumbled through the storm. Snow whipped at his face, burning like sand. The clinic doors loomed ahead, frozen open, the lights inside flickering like ghosts. Jack burst through the entrance, boots slipping on the tile. The sudden warmth of the building hit him like a wave. A nurse appeared from the hall, her eyes wide. "Oh my God, what happened?" "He's freezing," Jack gasped, voice raw. "Stopped breathing once. He's burning up now. Please, help him." The nurse yelled for help. 2 orderlies rushed in with a gurney, and Jack laid Ben down, his hands trembling so badly he could barely let go. "It's okay," the nurse said, her tone calm but urgent. "We've got him now. You did good, sir." "No," Jack rasped. "Not yet. His mother, she's still out there." The nurse froze, disbelief flashing across her face. "His mother? You found her?" Jack shook his head. "Not yet. She crashed her snowmobile. She's somewhere on Hollow Ridge. I tried to reach dispatch. Nothing." "Sir," the nurse said softly, "no one's getting up that ridge tonight. Not in this storm." Jack looked past her, toward the small trauma room where they'd wheeled the boy. The sound of monitors filled the air. Steady beeps, a rhythm of fragile life. He exhaled slowly, shoulders slumping. "Then I'll go when it breaks," he said. She wanted to argue, but something in his eyes, old, tired, unyielding, stopped her. Ranger padded to Jack's side, fur dripping, tail low. Jack knelt beside him, resting his forehead against the dog's for a moment. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "We got him here." The shepherd blinked slowly, pressing closer. Then, just as Jack sank onto the bench, head falling into his hands, he heard it. A sound so faint he almost thought it was the wind. But it wasn't. It was a voice, far away, lost in the storm, carried through the cracks of the night. "Help!" Jack lifted his head. Ranger's ears pricked up, his body tensing. The dog turned toward the door, tail stiff, nose flaring. Jack stared out through the glass, where the snow danced like ash under the floodlights. Somewhere beyond that storm, she was still alive. Emily Parker. The name burned in his chest like a prayer. He stood slowly, the weight of exhaustion forgotten, and placed his hand on Ranger's back. "Rest up, boy," he murmured. "We're going back out there. She's waiting for us." The dog gave a single low bark, almost solemn. Jack glanced toward the trauma room once more, toward the faint, rhythmic beeping that meant the boy had made it. Then he turned back to the window, where the world outside glowed white and endless. And in that stillness, between breath and storm, hope took root again. The night stretched long inside the mountain clinic, a fragile thread between life and loss. Outside, the storm still clawed at the windows, but inside, the halls pulsed with quiet urgency. Doctors and nurses moved with precision, voices low but steady, machines beeping in rhythm with fragile hope. Jack Grayson sat on a wooden bench in the corridor, his coat soaked, his hands raw and trembling. Ranger lay at his feet, chest rising and falling slowly, eyes fixed on the closed trauma room door. Neither of them had moved in hours. The smell of antiseptic mixed with melted snow, and somewhere down the hall, A heater hummed softly, the only warmth in a place built for survival, not comfort. Jack's mind ran through everything, every mile of snow, every heartbeat he'd forced back into that boy's chest, every prayer he'd whispered into the storm. He stared at his hands, cracked and red, still feeling the echo of the compressions. He'd done this before, long ago, in a desert where the sand had been red instead of white, and the blood that stained his gloves had belonged to men in uniform, not children. But tonight was different. Tonight it wasn't duty. It was something deeper, something that made his chest ache in a way war never had. A nurse emerged at last, wiping her forehead. "He's stable," she said. "Still weak, but the fever's breaking." Jack closed his eyes, a shuddered breath leaving his chest. Ranger lifted his head, tail thumping once against the floor. "Can I see him?" Jack asked, voice rough. "Just for a moment." The nurse nodded, holding the door open. Inside, the air was warm and heavy. Machines beeped softly beside the small hospital bed. Ben lay there, his face pale but peaceful, the same stuffed bear resting against his arm. His tiny chest rose in steady rhythm now, his lips no longer blue. Jack stood beside him, unsure whether to speak or simply watch. Then the boy stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, and his eyes, still hazy with sleep, met Jack's. "Mom?" he whispered, voice breaking. "Mom, where are you?" Tears welled before he could stop them, rolling silently down his cheeks. Jack swallowed hard, his throat tight. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "She's coming, kid. She's on her way." Ben looked at him for a moment, then closed his eyes again, whispering something too faint to hear. Jack stood there until his legs began to shake. He turned to leave, but Ranger had already moved closer, resting his head on the edge of the bed, watching the boy breathe. Morning came slow and gold over Aspen Hollow, sunlight spilling through torn clouds, glinting off the snow-covered peaks. The storm had finally died, leaving behind a world washed clean, like the earth itself had been reborn. Inside the clinic, the mood had shifted. Nurses smiled, voices lighter. Someone brewed coffee strong enough to cut through exhaustion. Jack sat near the window with Ranger at his side, staring at the mountains. He hadn't slept. Every few minutes, his mind drifted to the ridge, to the snowmobile wreck, to the faint voice he'd heard through the storm. He hadn't imagined it. He knew she was still out there. Then came the shout from the hallway. "We've got her! They found her!" Jack was on his feet before he even understood the words. The nurse from the night before ran in, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "The rescue team just called from Hollow Ridge," she said breathlessly. "They found Emily Parker alive. She followed your trail markers, the red cloths you left, and the birch note by the wreck. Said she saw your SOS flare and crawled toward the valley. She's hypothermic but conscious. They're bringing her in now." Jack just stood there, the words barely sinking in. Ranger barked once, sharp and joyful, tail slapping the wall. The nurse smiled through tears. "You saved her, Mr. Grayson. Both of them." When the rescue truck finally pulled up to the clinic, the doors burst open to a rush of cold air. 2 paramedics guided a stretcher through, their boots dripping snow. Emily Parker lay wrapped in thermal blankets, her face pale but alive. Her lips were cracked, her hair tangled with ice, yet there was light in her eyes, something fierce and unbroken. Jack stood frozen in the hallway as they wheeled her past. She turned her head weakly, eyes landing on him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached out a trembling hand. "You," she whispered, voice raw but full of gratitude. "You found him." Jack stepped closer, the world narrowing to just the two of them. "He's here," he said softly. He's safe. Her eyes filled instantly, tears freezing at the corners. I followed your trail, she breathed. The red cloth, the note, the footprints. I thought I was hallucinating, but they led me home. She reached for his hand, fingers cold against his calloused palm. You didn't just save my boy, Jack. You saved me. He shook his head, voice low. No, ma'am. I just did what anyone should have done. She smiled faintly, a fragile curve that carried more truth than words. No, she whispered. You did more than that. The nurses moved her to a room down the hall, but before the door closed, she turned to him again. Can I see him? Jack nodded. Soon. He's been asking for you. An hour later, the reunion unfolded like something sacred. Jack stood quietly in the doorway, while Ranger lay near the corner, tail sweeping the floor. Ben sat upright in the hospital bed, eyes wide, arms outstretched. Mom! Emily crossed the room before anyone could stop her. She fell to her knees beside the bed, wrapping him in her arms, holding him like she would never let go again. The boy sobbed against her shoulder, whispering, I knew you'd come, over and over. Jack looked away, blinking against the sting in his eyes. Ranger padded closer, resting his head against Emily's knee. She looked down, smiling through tears. And you're the brave one, aren't you? The dog licked her hand gently, tail wagging, as if he too understood the weight of what they'd survived. When she looked back up, her eyes found Jack again. She rose slowly, still holding her son's hand. I owe you everything, she said softly. You and that dog. You didn't just save my child. You saved me from a world that had already given up on me. Jack shook his head, his voice almost a whisper. You give me too much credit. Emily smiled, stepping closer. Maybe not enough. He didn't know what to say, so he just stood there, awkward but moved. After a moment, she reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of all the nights he'd spent alone in that cabin, of all the losses he never talked about. Maybe, she said quietly. You saved yourself too. Jack's eyes softened, the hint of a smile ghosting across his face. Maybe that boy did, he said, glancing toward Ben. Pulled me out of my own damn snowstorm. The words hung in the air, warm against the morning light. Outside, the sun had climbed over the peaks, setting the snow ablaze in gold. The storm was over, but what it left behind was something neither of them expected, a beginning born from the edge of loss. Ranger lay at their feet, eyes half closed, tail thumping once as if in approval. For the first time in years, Jack Grayson smiled fully. And somewhere beyond the glass, the mountains stood silent, guardians of a miracle that no storm could ever erase. The sun rose late over Aspen Hollow, spilling soft gold over the white slopes, painting the mountain in light that looked almost holy. The storm had passed 2 days ago, but its echoes still lingered. The heavy drifts along the ridge, the bent pines, the silence that followed a night the world nearly lost 3 souls. Jack Grayson stood outside the small mountain clinic, a cup of black coffee warming his hands, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon. The snow sparkled beneath the sun like shattered glass. Ranger lay beside him in the snow, his coat glistening, eyes half closed, ears twitching at every distant sound. For once the mountain didn't feel hostile. It felt alive again, breathing slowly under the calm. Jack took a sip, the bitter coffee grounding him in a way nothing else could. Behind him, the door creaked open. Emily Parker stepped outside, bundled in a hospital blanket over her jacket. Her face was pale but peaceful now, a few faint bruises fading along her jawline, strands of brown hair curling loosely around her cheeks. She looked tired. Yes, but not broken. There was strength in her eyes, the kind of strength that only comes after surviving what should have killed you. "You're up early," she said softly. Jack turned slightly, offering a faint smile. "Habit. Army teaches you that mornings are for thinking." She smiled back. "Does it help?" "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it just reminds you what you've lost." He looked out over the valley again. "But not this time." She walked beside him, pulling the blanket tighter. "The doctor says Ben can leave by tomorrow. They think he'll make a full recovery." Jack nodded, relief flashing briefly in his eyes. "That kid's tougher than he looks." Emily glanced down at Ranger, who opened one eye, tail brushing the snow. "And this one?" she asked with a small smile. "He never left that hallway, did he?" Jack chuckled quietly. "Nope, sat there all night, guarding the door like it was his post. Guess old soldiers never really retire." Ranger gave a low huff, as if agreeing. Emily laughed softly, the sound fragile but real. For a while they stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher. The town below had begun to stir, thin lines of smoke rising from chimneys, the faint sound of a church bell carried by the wind. It felt like the world had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Emily finally spoke, voice quiet. "They told me what you did, how you brought him back, how you left those trail markers so we could find our way out." Jack shifted, uncomfortable under praise. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Most people would have kept driving when the storm hit. You didn't." She turned toward him, her eyes shining. "You saved my boy. You saved me." Jack looked away, jaw tightening. Maybe I was just paying back a debt. "To who?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "My daughter," he said finally. 5 winters ago. Fever took her before I could get her to the hospital. Roads were iced over, same as that night. I've been trying to forgive myself ever since." Emily's eyes softened, her voice trembling. "Jack, I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Maybe this was how I was meant to make it right." He glanced at Ranger. We all needed saving that night. A gentle quiet settled between them, not heavy but warm. Then Emily smiled, that small, grateful smile that seemed to light her entire face. "Maybe you were meant to find us," she said. Jack looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe I was." The next morning dawned clear and sharp. The mountain glittered under a fresh coat of frost. Jack loaded his pickup outside the clinic, an extra blanket, a toolbox, a few cans of fuel. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat, tail wagging. Emily came out with Ben in her arms, the boy bundled in a thick jacket and a knitted beanie that hung too big over his ears. "You sure you want to leave so soon?" Jack asked, though his tone was gentle. "The roads aren't kind this time of year." Emily smiled. "We're heading down to Aspen Hollow. My sister's waiting there. She has a place for us." Jack nodded. "Good. That's a safe road now. They cleared it this morning." Ben reached toward Ranger. "Can he come too?" he asked, eyes wide. Ranger barked once, as if answering. Jack laughed. "I think he's already decided he's family." Emily laughed too, her hand brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Then maybe you both should come visit when you get tired of that cabin." Jack hesitated, then smiled, the lines around his eyes softening. "Maybe we will." As she lifted Ben into the truck's back seat, the boy leaned forward, whispering something. "Thank you, Mr. Jack." Jack glanced back, his voice warm. "You're welcome, kid. You keep your mom safe now." "I will," Ben said proudly. "Just like you and Ranger." The drive down the ridge was slow and quiet. The snow crunched beneath the tires, the world glittering in sunlight. When they reached the edge of town, the church bell rang again. Clear, bright, like it was meant for them. Emily stepped out, turned back to him, and extended her hand. "You'll come by?" she asked. "There's hot coffee and maybe a pie if you're lucky." Jack shook her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "You've got yourself a deal." For a long moment they stood there, two lives once lost in the storm, now tethered by survival and something deeper neither dared to name. Then she climbed back into the truck, waved once, and drove off down the road, the tires kicking up plumes of white. Jack watched until the red tail lights disappeared behind the bend. Ranger sat beside him, watching too, ears perked. "Yeah," Jack said softly. "She's something, huh?" The dog gave a single bark, tail sweeping the snow. Jack chuckled, running a hand through his hair. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke and new beginnings. He looked toward the horizon, the same mountains that had nearly taken them now glowing gold under the morning sun. "Come on, boy," he said finally. "Let's go home." They started up the trail again, the pickup climbing steady through the snow. The world around them was quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. When the cabin came into view, Jack felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not loneliness this time, not regret, something gentler. He parked the truck, stepped out, and looked toward the mountains. The light touched everything, the roof, the trees, even the old porch swing that hadn't moved in years. He smiled faintly. Inside, the fire was out, but the room still held warmth, as if hope itself had settled there and refused to leave. Jack hung his coat, sat beside the window, and watched Ranger curl up by the hearth. Outside, the wind had softened to a whisper. He took a slow breath, his reflection faint in the frosted glass. Somewhere out there, a mother and her son were safe, alive because of choices made in the heart of a storm. And in that quiet cabin, for the first time in years, Jack Grayson didn't feel alone. He reached down, scratched behind Ranger's ear, and whispered, "We did good, old boy." The dog thumped his tail once, eyes closing, content. Jack leaned back, gaze drifting toward the morning light breaking over the peaks. The storm was over, but what it left behind was something greater than survival. It was redemption, quiet and real. And as the snow outside melted into glittering rivulets, a new day began over Aspen Hollow, carrying with it the promise of peace and the reminder that even in the darkest storms, light always finds its way home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. They come quietly, through ordinary people who choose compassion over fear. That night in Aspen Hollow wasn't just about a soldier saving a child, or a mother finding her way home. It was about how God moves through us, even when we think we're lost. Jack Grayson didn't set out to find redemption, but in helping a stranger, he found grace. The snowstorm that nearly took everything instead became the road that led him back to faith, back to purpose, and back to life. Maybe that's what miracles really are. Not the things that happen to us, but the moments when we choose to love, to act, to believe. In every small act of kindness, in every hand reaching out through the dark, God's light finds a way to break through. So tonight, as you finish this story, take a moment to pray for someone who's still lost in their own storm. A veteran, a single mother, a lonely neighbor, or maybe even yourself. And if you believe, like Jack did, that no storm lasts forever, then hit subscribe, leave a comment to share where you're watching from, and tell us what your miracle looks like. Because in a world that can feel cold and uncertain, faith, kindness, and love are still the greatest miracles of all. May God bless you, your family, and every heart that still believes in second chances.